My name is Dave Castles, the president of the Coalition for Canadian Police Reform. And I must say I'm very pleased with the significant turnout from across the breadth of our country. And I want to thank all of you for attending. Today, I'd like to open by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territories of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have marked these lands for centuries. An important step in reconciliation is our acknowledgement of traditional land. I would also like to recognize the family of the deceased victims and the surviving victims of the mass casualty event. It is my understanding that family members and surviving victims are in attendance today. Thank you for being with us today, and we invite your full participation. The Coalition for Canadian Police Reform is a national nonprofit focused solely on elevating the police profession in Canada. Our vision is to see the creation of a College of Policing responsible for research and the creation of national training and education standards for our police officers. Regrettably, the entry level and in-service training of our police officers today is too brief, too subjective, inconsistent from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and does not match the competencies required. We believe that our coalition offers a practical solution and will work with government, police stakeholder groups, and citizen groups to achieve our mission and vision. With public support and stakeholder cooperation, we will work to improve the quality of police service delivery in Canada. Our only mission is to advance the professional status of policing, and by supporting the training and education requirements of the Mass Casualty Commission, this is an important webinar. I would now like to introduce and welcome our webinar moderator, Norm Taylor. Norm is the editor-in-chief, Journal of Community Safety and Wellbeing. He is an advisor, educator, author, and researcher concentrating on policing and public safety. Norm has organized and moderated many national conferences focusing on police and mental health issues in partnership with the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police and the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Norm, with good reason, is very proud of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police Executive Global Studies Program. He has led over 250 executives through global studies research, just with research studies in 56 countries. He has provided strategic advice to many police services, communities, and governments in Canada and the US. Norm served as a moderator and lead author for the Ontario Chiefs Coroner Expert Panel on Police Officer Deaths by Suicide, and also served on the Council of Canadian Academics Expert Panel on Policing with Indigenous Community. Norm has agreed to introduce our speakers, panelists, I guess I should say, and moderate the Q&A session following all presentations. We will conclude this afternoon with a summary of our mission and lessons learned from this webinar by Dr. John Lilly, our Vice President. I'm now very pleased to welcome Norm Taylor. Norm?
Well, thank you, Dave. That was a kind and generous introduction, and I join with you in wanting to begin by acknowledging the very sobering nature of these discussions. As important as they are and as candid as we want to be with one another, I don't think it'll be far from anyone's mind the scope of this tragedy, the impact it has had not only on the families that were directly impacted in Nova Scotia, but the entire maritime community and across Canada. I think, you know, I've been around long enough and worked in policing now for about 30 years in my various capacities. And one of the things that always stands out for me is the dramatic impact that 9/11 had on watching the impossible happen. Things that would not have had any viability in 1999 or 2000 suddenly became possible, sadly because of the tragedy, but fortunately because it was a clarion call for many dramatic changes across our whole security sphere. I think the Portapique tragedy presents an opportunity to be a 9/11 event for Canada. It has the opportunity to maybe break log jams. A lot of what you're going to hear today, a lot of what we read in the MCC report is not new. It has been said before many times by many people. And I think our focus today is going to be to concentrate on how do we bring change forward? How do we accelerate some of those very necessary changes? I'm really pleased to have been invited to contribute in this role as moderator. In my own analysis of the report, I see 4 predominant themes. And as I kind of guide us through this discussion today with our panelists, I think there's elements related to accountability and community-based policing. There are elements around police adequacy in terms of consistently reliable standards and training. And of course, that's a major focus for the coalition that is hosting this webinar. I think we have fundamental questions about the mission of policing in a 21st century Canada that have been raised and echoed by the MCC. And for many years, a lot of us have been trying to move policing more and more towards a victim-centered mindset. And I know that'll be front and center for a lot of the people that have joined this webinar today. From a format point of view, my own thing is always when I'm a moderator is one, to make sure that this is interactive and dynamic so that we hear the best of what we can within the limited period of time. We won't plumb every depth and we won't hear every single point, but I do believe the panelists have come ready to offer us perspective and to help us all work towards action. And that's going to be the focus. Secondly, you'll find that I'm not the kind of moderator who merely kind of introduces and points to the exit. I do like to get involved, and you might hear some comments from me from time to time as well. And I invite you to follow suit. We have a chat facility. If you want to post a comment to the chat, a few of us will be monitoring that chat, and I'll try to make sure that we can select items that will help guide the conversation forward. Don't be shy. The panelists are going to carry a lot of the weight, but they're not going to carry it all. I already know a couple of people that do want to contribute, and we'll draw on those opportunities. At this point, let me move quickly to introduce your panelists for today. And among them, we've got some tremendously informed perspectives. I'm going to start by introducing Sandra McCulloch. I'm going to just give you a quick intro on all 3, and then I'll be calling on each of them to get us started. Sandra McCulloch is a distinguished litigation lawyer practicing in Nova Scotia. She and her colleagues at Patterson Law actually have offices throughout the most affected areas in this tragedy, and they've represented the interests and concerns of victims and their families before, during, and after the MCC deliberations and report. Sandra was admitted to the bar in 2011, and she's a member of the Nova Scotia Barristers Society and the Canadian Bar Association. Joining Sandra on the panel is Kent Roach. Kent is a highly recognized professor at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. I actually had the opportunity to serve on an expert panel with Kent a few years ago, and I'm always impressed by his deep knowledge and his incisive thinking. Kent wishes to stress that he is speaking today for himself, and not as the recently appointed chair of the RCMP Management Advisory Board, MAB, or any of his other affiliations. So please recognize that. In 2022, Kent received significant accolades for his book, Canadian Policing: Why and How It Must Change. And our third panelist is Dr. Eli Sopow, who is now an associate professor at University Canada West, after serving for several years as director of continuous improvement and analysis in the RCMP's BC strategy branch, and also as an assistant deputy minister in the BC government. Notably, Eli guided much of the earlier transformational work arising from earlier reports, I believe including Opal and Brown reports, among others. And please join me silently, at least, in welcoming those 3 panelists. And we look forward to everything they're going to contribute to us. Sandra, I'm going to start with you, and I don't want to hem you in and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but one of the things that I certainly noted in a lot of your own work and commentary on this is a recognition of the apparent inadequacy of the RCMP as outlined in the report, as well as specifics around communications. I know you have many things to say, and I know that this isn't just about repeating any of the observations on the RCMP. Can you take us to a higher level? Can you tell us, as you come into this panel, what is most on your mind that you think people should know on behalf of the folks that you represent? Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I went to turn my mic on. I turned my video off instead. Thank you, Norm. And I just want to start today. I want to just take a brief moment to express my gratitude for being here today. It's a privilege to be in this virtual room. But I wanted to harken back to something I've said repeatedly, that being heard, truly heard, has been a constant struggle for our clients. It's important that they be privy to, and to the extent that they can be participant in, these discussions arising out of the recommendations coming from the Mass Casualty Commission. I think we probably will all agree that these discussions are going to be all the better for having my clients, the families, those most affected, surviving victims, and the Nova Scotia community in general involved in the discussion. And on the topic of gratitude, I also want to thank the coalition, the panelists, and all the participants on the call here today for initiating this discussion. It means a great deal to my clients to see you all invested in their story and to have more hands helping them carry the torch. As you all know, of course, the Mass Casualty Commission has identified that there's an enormous amount of work to be done. The deficiencies identified in the RCMP's policing in this particular matter, both that which contributed to, were revealed by, or were actually exacerbated the mass casualty event that caused immeasurable harm to the people that I represent, had a negative impact upon them and continues to, and not just them, but as you've identified, Norm, the broader community here in Nova Scotia and beyond. That's a weight that's carried with them every day. So to that end, it's really critical that these discussions, that they happen, that they address what we've lost and why we lost it, and so that we can ensure it doesn't happen again. My clients aren't the experts about how we map a path forward to actioning the recommendations that arose out of the Mass Casualty Commission. And at least there's a good number of them that they really need your help with. And so our clients are relying upon the coalition and others to share your knowledge and your expertise to help inform and engage the public on what contemporary society needs from its police forces, and to help motivate our policing institutions and those that oversee them to bring about meaningful, positive change. So I'm not sure if that's really a response to your question there, Norm, but I just wanted to help frame our discussion with those introductory remarks.
I think it's a great place to start, Sandra. Thanks for that. And we're going to dig deeper on some of those specifics. But, you know, your comments remind me that I think from the beginning we have to recognize, and maybe it's obvious, but in terms of responsibility for this tragedy, it rests with the offender. There are obviously many opportunities for those who responded and those who will respond to similar events in the future to do better. But I think it's nice to set the tone that we're all here in a constructive frame of mind. And I like the way you use the phrase, more hands to carry the torch. There's an important torch to be carried. Canadians deserve the highest standard of policing. And I know from the 56 countries that we've studied over the past 20 years, the regard for Canadian policing is universal around the world. But that doesn't mean we stop where we are. And when we can learn that there are things that we need to do better to meet the expectations of Canadians, I think we need to do it. So I should have said in my opening remarks, I'll say it now, I hope that we'll all work towards a constructive tone here, and look towards what actions can be taken forward. What have we learned? What can we learn? And how do we move it forward? And I know that's the spirit that you're bringing into the discussion as well. So thank you for that. Kent, why don't we get started with you? I almost don't need to trigger you. I know there's a million things that you'll want to say, but one of the things that really struck me, and I mentioned this to you recently, that when a quote that you had that said, knowledge workers such as modern police should be educated to inquire, to reason, and to question, and not simply be trained. Why don't you start there and then just go where you want to go? Kent, introduce yourself to the room.
Thank you, Norm. And I also would like to thank the organizers and offer my sincere condolences to the family members, the affected family members who are with us. This sense of police as knowledge workers really came from my experience both with the Canadian Council of Academies task force on the future of policing, and then later when I served with Norm on its task force on the policing of Indigenous communities. So the police are well paid in Canada, and rightly so, but I think that there is a real sense that the training, and we often do refer to training as opposed to education, has not caught up with that. And Norm mentioned that the Mass Casualty Commission is obviously a catalyst, should be a catalyst, but that it also repeats things that many have said before. So the Brown Task Force way back in 2007 expressed concerns with the model of training. One thing I would add to the discussion, though, and this is maybe not always apparent from the MCC report, is that the average age of a recruit, a cadet recruit to the RCMP, is now 28 years of age. So we are dealing with older adult learners, and I think that that also gives us an opportunity to change the way police are educated, both in terms of what happens before they go out on the street, but also this sense that policing is a profession, a knowledge-based, hopefully evidence-based profession, and no less than nursing or law or medicine has to have a continuous learning component to it. I also served as director of research into Justice Gloria Epstein's report, Missing and Missed, which dealt with the missing persons investigations involving a number of racialized men from Toronto's LGBTQ2S village. And, you know, one of the things that Justice Epstein said is, you know, why are we always talking about training? Yes, I mean, I understand that, you probably need to be trained with respect to certain weapons, but what we need is education. And that education has to not necessarily be monopolized simply by the police as teachers. So if you turn to page 687, and I'm sure you all have it on your desk, of Justice Epstein's report, one of the things that she says is that, in my view, members of Toronto's marginalized and vulnerable communities need to be involved in the education of service members. And she talked about the lack of knowledge of the community. I think those lessons can also be applied with respect to rural policing, and can also be applied with respect to crime victims and those affected by crime, survivors of crime. So I think that one thing we need is for the learning that goes on first before a police officer assumes his or her duties, and the learning that is available and undertaken throughout their careers must become more transparent and more open, and more open to the learning from lived experience of those who are most affected and unfortunately often failed by policing. And I think that this is really a task that we all need to undertake. I would like to see some federal government leadership in terms of the federal government perhaps having the most money to spend. But I'm looking forward to learning from others about innovations that we should build on. So those are my preliminary comments. Thank you.
That's a great start, Kent. I'm going to pick up there, Eli. Kent's making I think, a fairly strong implication there that policing may be a little insular in its thinking, and that the training, design, and delivery is largely still modeled upon those traditions. I don't know if you had an opportunity, or if others had an opportunity, to see the Canadian Press piece today. It was kind of an open editorial commenting on these traditions and their intractability. We'll talk more about them in detail, but Eli, I guess the question, you've been involved in introducing change and transformation within the RCMP. Is this just about the RCMP?
No, it's a nature of policing in general, but you're right. I spent 20 years with the RCMP as Director of Research and Continuous Improvement, and a couple of years on the RCMP national group, the change management team after the Brown Commission. And over those years, and even currently, we still do some work with detachments. Collectively, I've looked at over 15,000 RCMP employees across the country, both civilian and regular members. Well over 500 detachments right across the whole country, over and over and over again. And the conclusions they're sadly always the bloody same. Sadly, always the same. Because I'm telling you, the people who are hurting here, and again, I'm really honored to be here with you folks and the people of Nova Scotia. But the results, let me tell you what's happening here. This is predictable. What happened was predictable, and it's predictable it's going to happen again. Why? Well, let's have a look at the evidence-based research, as we say. Over the years, the training has been pathetic. The leadership has not been well. When we do all these surveys, and surveys are surveys are surveys, but we actually go boots on the ground and talk to people and see what they're thinking about. And here's how it works. They say, yeah, we got all kinds of systems and processes, and we've got accountability measures, right? We've got accountability measures, but nobody holds us accountable because we have poor leadership. Sure, we have responsibilities. Oh, they're laid out all kinds of places, the RCMP Act, and on and on and on it goes. But we don't do it. Well, why don't you do it? Because what is culture? Here's a definition. Here's a simple definition. Culture is what I can get away with. And at the RCMP and other police services, as Dr. Kurt Griffiths and I and others have looked at some recent ones, they get away with a lot. And why do they get away with a lot? Because the leadership is frankly very poorly structured. Yes, does education play a role? Yes, evidence-based. Members and police officers with a university education, not saying it's a be-all, end-all, but those with a university education are proven to be better in the field in terms of communications, empathy, and exercising a lot less violent responses. So I'm kind of going on here a bit, but those are the kind of things that bother me. And to prepare for this, I had a very good conversation with former Deputy Steve Graham, who I used to work with as well, who used to be in charge of Atlantic, but even more currently with former Inspector Dale Bogle of the RCMP, again from Nova Scotia, and he was actually just recently a CAO, administrative officer for a community, which maybe I won't mention, that actually experienced what happened at Portapique. The guy drove through their community. And it's people like Dale and there's people like Stephen who have looked at this really, really carefully, and they hit the bottom line. They say, you know what? The federal government is not held responsible. God bless municipalities. They're not always held responsible. The province is not held responsible. And so the funding systems created by a culture has led to all kinds of horrible things happening that trickle down to the disasters we've seen.
Wow. Okay, this is great. We're opening up already, and there are so many things in there that I want to deconstruct a little bit further. But Sandra, I got to go to you right now because, Eli just said this was predictable, and it is predictable. Again, I can't imagine how this plays for the folks that you represent? Do they want to hear that? What do they want to hear?
I think that would make them awfully uncomfortable to hear that. You know, the RCMP has conveyed the language of this being an extraordinary event. You know, the circumstances, what happened. It's just unlike anything that has ever happened before, which didn't sit well with our clients. You know, we've had lots to say about that, that really all of the pieces that went into this were ordinary, everyday things for the most part. And yet all those balls were, or many of those balls were still dropped. But it would be deeply discouraging for our clients to really deeply appreciate. And I think to the general public as well, which is, you know, why we look to you folks here today to help the general public and help our clients understand, you know, what is the pattern of deficiency that has led us to Portapique and what happened in and outside of Portapique. And you know, so and that'll help us identify some of the priorities going forward, because absolutely my clients are not going to stand for this happening again. And I think that there's a lot of folks out there that won't either.
So we need to find opportunities for those voices to continue. Back to Kent's point about drawing in lived experience and not be thinking this through in isolation. I think there's an important point there that we don't silence those and say, okay, don't worry about it. We got it. We're going to do this on our own now, right? Because we've seen how easily it is to lose the momentum when the system takes it on for itself. But I got to go back to you, Eli. Something you said, culture is what I can get away with. Is it just that? I mean,
well, culture plays a big role. Culture plays a big role, because if you look at an organization, what is it all about? Well, a culture is what we believe in, what we think in, what our values are, all that kind of stuff we know about, right? But what comes out of a culture? Well, you need a structure to give it some body, some bones to how to make this thing work. Well, that's nice. Then what happens? Well, then we have systems to give the structure some power and to do things. Well, when those things are not really properly aligned, they impact what we call the workplace climate. So we have a culture that it's old-fashioned, it's outdated in some places, and believe me, I know a lot of people have experienced this. It's almost anti-academic bias in terms of, well, what the hell do you know? What do you want to go to university for? I've heard members say that to me. They're trying to get a master's, and their officer in charge of them says, what the hell do you want to do that for? Go up, throw out some handcuffs on a guy, and that's what you need to do. That still exists out there. So there's that culture. Now the structure, a very old-fashioned command and control, top to bottom, that too creates the kind of systems that they have. And that's whether it's HR systems or training systems or whatever. Part of those systems is communication. And believe me, from experience, the RCMP, for sure, what I know about nationally, it's a top-down communication model. Here's what we do. Here's what we say. Wait for us to give you the media lines. Now go parrot those things out. I've experienced that firsthand, as a matter of fact, with 9/11. So those things, when you have all those things working like that in really, really dysfunctional ways, who does it affect? Well, our members, the police officers and civilians. That's why they have relatively high job satisfaction. Do they like their job being a cop, for example? It's around 70, 80% overall. What about your morale? How do you feel about actually being here? How you're treated? You know what? It drops down to 30%. I've seen it at 40. I've seen single-digit morale in detachments where they say, Christ, I'm understaffed. I'm underloved, I think, by my commander here. I'm under-resourced. I'm working extra shifts. I'm going from here to there to here to there, and I'm supposed to be a social worker, a cop at the same time. Gee, now I'm a medic. How do you think those people feel? How do you think it affects their ability to do their job and do the things we want to do in terms of good relationships with the public, to be sensitive, to be open to all kinds of different requirements of the community that's changing? Of course, you got to change the whole darn thing completely. You can't put square pegs into round holes, which we've been doing and doing and doing and doing.
So let me offer this, because I think people talk a lot about culture, and eating strategy and all of those phrases that are out there, but we're on the cusp of one significant culture change in policing that does seem to be gaining traction and success, and that's around the whole issue of wellness and the mental wellness of our members. And recently moderated a conference in Ottawa. It was the 4th time that we've had a national conference on this, and I can tell you that between 2015, when we did the first one, and last month, there's a huge change in the overall recognition of how important mental well-being is, how important it is that we take care of that. In many ways, that's a culture change. So why are some parts of policing culture amenable to change and others not? Kent, let me ask you specifically, getting more specific. What is it? Is it about the decision-making structures that were in effect, the behaviors of leaders? What do you think led to the missteps in this tragedy? Mute.
I mean, I agree with Eli about the importance of culture. And again, I'll direct you back to Justice Epstein's report, this time around page 782 or 682, where she says, throughout this review, I was repeatedly struck by the realization that the culture of policing has the potential to nullify reform efforts. I heard countless warning that culture eats education. And she says, my work over the past several years had made it clear that culture eats other attempts at reform, including attempts to make consultation with the public meaningful. And of course, she's talking there about the Toronto Police Service. So I think it is important to look at this as a whole. I mean, I think that the MCC may have recommended the closing down of Depot for some of the same reasons that Justice Arbour put Royal Military College and affiliated institutions on the table in her review. That there's a sense that the culture of the organization, and certainly Justice Bastarache was of this view, was that the heart of the RCMP is at Depot. Its mind may be others, but that we need to look at that issue. So again, I think that recommendation, and there's already been a lot of pushback from Saskatchewan, and certainly when I've talked to some regular members, most of them are pretty opposed to it that I've talked to. But I think that we should look at that not only as kind of an end in and of itself. I mean, it is a gradual recommendation, but also as a way to kind of pinpoint what the culture is, or what the culture is perceived to be. Because I mean, the other thing that I've been an academic, since 1989, and I wouldn't romanticize academia. Academics are generally, about 10 years behind the curve, partly because, especially in Canada, academics have not had the access to policing organizations. And again, the MCC and my colleague Ben Gould from UBC makes this comment. So again, I would take the MCC's recommendations to both with respect to Depot and with respect to a 3-year degree as partly a indication of what they felt was the magnitude of the problem. But of course, any solution to culture and any solution to education has to deal with officers that are already on police services, and has to deal with continuing education. So in no ways do I want to diminish the importance of getting the preliminary training right and doing that in an evidence-based way. But I think that we need to work on a kind of continuous learning where there frankly is the resources so that it isn't, all the learning that a serving officer has is squeezed into 2 or 3 days, and most of that has to be recertification on this and recertification on that, kind of the immediate stuff, and no sort of reflection on how the police are supposed to interact with the community, interact with other community and public agencies.
Let me make the argument here that one of the problems we'll have is no matter how many times we move deck chairs at training facilities, if we don't raise this beyond those specifics and even beyond culture, I would say, to the level of mission, it is the problem that we don't have a modernized mission for policing. And Sandra, I'm going to go back to you on this one, because there were 2 specific aspects of the MCC recommendations that shine through very strongly with regards to police understanding or not understanding the mission. And I'm kind of interested in asking, this might be a tough question, but those relate to the degree to which policing is invested in a broader community safety and well-being mindset, that they are really trying to create a healthy society. They're not only the people who are trying to create the appropriate files for prosecutions, arrest, charge, all that enforcement stuff. And the second is the degree to which we're progressing at all with regards to gender-based crime, intimate partner violence, the way we understand that and the way we understand its perpetrators. So that, to come to a question, Sandra, how close do you think the folks you represent would say their understanding of what they thought policing is for or should be versus what they witnessed in their experience? How wide is that gap?
I think it would be fair to say that by and large, there was a surprise at the disconnect between my clients' expectations and what was actually delivered to them. And I think that we can probably see that in some very specific examples. For example, the disregard of what the community could offer by way of information or insight or any sort of contribution to the ongoing investigation when the events were happening in and around Portapique. There seemed to be a complete disregard for, there are people in this community that can tell us things. There are people who service this community that can tell us things, that can shed light on this. And there seemed to be just whether it's a lack of interest or a lack of respect for the community, that it's just not worth it to us to take the time to do this, or it's not worth it to us to pursue and more deeply investigate the information that is coming to us from the community. And this stems right back to the very first call that initiated the police response. And so I think that that is an example of a pretty significant disappointment, and has really cast some doubt upon, is the policing that we think we're receiving really actually what we're going to receive?
So one of my colleagues raised an interesting question, and it goes back to Eli's earlier point about what we can get away with. There's an old saying that most of you have heard: what gets measured gets done. Are we measuring the wrong things? Are we so locked in on the metrics of one concept of policing that may have had relevance in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, and unable to recognize the ways in which we need to measure and account for what Sandra's talking about: meeting community expectations, meeting the needs of victims, understanding the lived experience, as Kent mentioned. What are your thoughts on that? Eli, you start.
Well, here's what I'd like to say, and I agree with the senator. Let's think about something. You go to the supermarket and you want to buy some food, and you think, well, I feel pretty safe because we have national policies, we have national oversights, we have national laws about food safety. Okay, what about when I go to the hospital, when I see my physician or nurse? Are they qualified? Well, gee whiz, they have national standards of professionalism and what they do and how they do it, and they're monitored by specialist colleges who oversee that kind of thing, psychiatrists, You name it. Think of a few other things. I can get in my car and I know there are national safety standards that are overseen by all kinds of agencies. Oh, by the way, what are the national standards to be a police officer? They vary from province to province? Oh, gee, is there a professional college that oversees those standards? I mean, think about it. Here's the area where these individuals, rightfully so, brave individuals, have the power of life and death and to save us and to intervene in very dramatic situations with what? No standards? If somebody rolled up to your house tonight and said, hey, I got some fresh meat for you. How'd you like to buy it? Sure. Is it approved? Or, no, I just picked up some stuff in here. How would you like it? Sure. Why not? You wouldn't stand for these things. Your physician, you walk into their office and you're looking for their diploma. Are you looking for that from the police officer? How could this have happened?
And maybe even worse, they not only roll up with meat that doesn't meet a standard, they say, sorry, you ordered meat. We only deliver fish.
That's right. And we're delivering a lot of fish instead of meat.
Yeah, exactly. Kent, reaction?
Well, I mean, part of what I'm hearing from Sandra, though, is a lack of awareness of the local community and a lack of respect. And so, one of the findings that really strikes me from the MCC is that the advisory committees for the RCMP detachment hadn't met in, I think it was a couple of years. And, on paper, Nova Scotia has a fairly elaborate system to feed in. So yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to national standards, although, I question whether we have the research base in Canada to come up with those national standards. But I also look at a lot of these issues as governance issues. And indeed, my book on Canadian policing, I think that's the central argument, is that whether it is at the national, provincial, or local level, we need to have better governance of the police. We can no longer essentially allow the police to be self-governed. So, I would not, I mean, again, national standards may very well have a role, but I think that we have an extremely diverse community, country. The RCMP polices in a range of different environments. And then you add self-administered Indigenous services, regional services, provincial services to that. And so I think that we need to make sure that the process of governing, the process of, back and forth conversations between the police and those who represent the community, that those occur, because although there may be a place for national standards, I also don't think that we live in a country where one size fits all.
Okay, so let's talk about governance, because it is very uneven across the country. And you're quite right, Ken, there's no one size fits all. And we know that policing by and large is provincially and territorially administered. And only the RCMP falls under a federal governance structure that is still being reformed as we speak. Is this doable? Is it possible? Is there any way, because back to Eli's point and the expectations of the folks that Sandra represents, surely we can't spend another 10 years saying, sorry, we can't get any of this done because Ontario wants to do it this way, Saskatchewan that way, Nova Scotia's got something else, and the feds won't play along. I don't think that works for the people you wrote about in the Toronto gay community. I don't think it works for Sandra's victims, clients. Frankly, it doesn't work for me. I mean, look at
the MCC on top of the Public Order Emergency Commission report from Justice Rouleau. Even though Justice Rouleau only had a federal mandate, he made pretty clear that the Ottawa Police Service Board was missing in action and that was part of the problem. And so, my own personal view is that the MCC gives us a chance to open up the RCMP Act. And I think Bill 303 is a start, although I disagree with some of the broader notions of operational independence embraced in that private member's bill. And I think we need to get that governance piece right. That doesn't mean that we don't fight on education and standards and other issues. But if we don't get the governance piece right, if we're in this kind of no zone where the politically responsible authorities have to worry about claims of political interference, and it may be frankly in the mutual interest of those who are supposed to be governing and the police to leave this murky. So I've argued, and I was happy to see that the MCC adopted the Ipperwash report, and I was part of the Research Advisory Council. The only difference that I would see is that the one thing the MCC doesn't recommend, that Justice Linden recommended way back in 2007, is that we define police independence, which I think is a constitutional principle, but we define it in a fairly limited way, that we don't want ministers or police boards telling police who to investigate or who not to investigate. And we can see south of the border that we can't assume that that's always going to be the case. But other than that, as long as there is some system of transparency where a police chief can say, okay, that's against my better advice, but you better write that down and do it that way. I think that we should have done that, immediately after the Ipperwash inquiry. How many inquiries, how many controversies do we have to have in Canada about police-government relations until we finally set up a workable system? And I think that the federal government has an ability to lead by example here, because although there are some things in the unproclaimed Ontario Policing Act that I think are good, the community safety and well-being plans, and of course the MCC essentially wants to take those national, and Edmonton and Regina and others are already moving in that direction, and I think that's positive. I still don't think the Ontario legislation, with its vague reference to operational independence and day-to-day operations, has got it right. For me, the answer is in Campbell and Charose. The answer is in what Justice Hughes recommended way back in 2001. Now, that's only one answer, but it's one answer to a piece of the puzzle. And I think one of the things the MCC does in its sheer staggering breadth is it reveals anyone who dips into it just how complex policing is. And of course, policing in Canada is complex because we have a kind of forced cooperative federalism. We have, fundamental divisions between localities, which should be a level of government in our Constitution, but are not, and the province or territories and federal. So this is complex.
Let me jump in, Kent, because I'm seeing those are all great observations, and I think I'm seeing in the comments, as many of you are, if you're watching the chat, a lot of very informed people saying that we can do this. And to what degree does legislation have to lead us versus leadership lead us? And does this go to a question of courageous leadership? And so let me put it this way. And I'm going to call on my longtime colleague, Cal Corley. Cal, you still got your ears on here, and are you willing to speak to this? You raised an interesting question in one of our comments, and that is, to what degree is the MCC and all of its recommendations and observations, and the fact that, as you just said, Ken, it piles on earlier reports. To what extent is this revealing some fundamental flaw within policing that makes it impossible for us to move forward in areas that virtually everyone on the chat is saying are possible? Are we using legislation, jurisdiction, all of those things as an excuse to not act and to not move forward? Or the corollary of that, to go glass half full, is with the right leadership, can we in fact listen and hear what's being said in these reports and start finding ways to transcend those various barriers? Kind of a variation on the old form follows function. Let's start functioning the way we're supposed to, and we can figure out the legislation and the form as we go. What are your thoughts? Cal, you there? You want to comment?
Yeah, happy to, Norm. I think if we solve this one, we can bring peace to the Middle East next. It's a significant magnitude, and as you've heard from colleagues around the table, this is a systems issue, and it's a broader system than just the police. When I think of, listening just a moment ago to Kent and talking about the police governance and accountability ecosystem, and one that I think everybody here would probably agree is in the main pretty broken. But if we don't get governance right, the rest of it will fall or won't follow. So I think governance is really incredibly important. I'm going to come at this a bit from the side here, Norm. When I think about the issue of we started with a bit earlier in terms of culture, I've long held that if there's no change in the operating model, there'll be no change in culture. So, and references made to Justice Epstein's report. Another important one in this vein is Mr. Justice Ayakubuchi's report in 2014 following the Samia team shooting. And in chapter 5 of that report, which he was not mandated to write, but he felt compelled to, it was about police culture. And in this case, what Mr. Justice Ayakubuchi touches on is culture is an impediment to learning. And more precisely, what he set forward there, that if the future is really about evolving, personally, how I would characterize it as a post-community policing era, one that's, pardon me, I've got two dogs here in the room. One that's really characterized by the multidisciplinary collaborative approach to providing community safety and well-being, in which the police are no longer, as Kelling put it back in 1988, at the center of the community safety model, still a very important player. This move is one that's requiring a balance. It's not an either-or, but a balance between the emphasis on law enforcement, investigation, and intelligence, which really, if you look at what's valued in most police services in Canada, it's that. So the people that are working on the softer, the preventative work, the partnership collaborations, whether it's mental health and addictions, whether it's dealing with homelessness or other preventative and upstream work, that's not as valued as much in the culture. So what Ayakubuchi says in his report is that if you paint it black and it's tactical, there'll be lots of uptake on the training. But if it's about training that's geared towards transformation to something else, in this case, as I would put it, one that provides equal balance to these two realities, he says you've got a real challenge there. Now, so culture change, no changes to the operating model, very difficult to change culture. And it's a system, because your culture is going to be defined, to the point Eli made, not only what you can get away with, but what's rewarded. So in RCMP and in every police service across Canada, look at what's rewarded in these organizations. Look at what's rewarded, your annual performance review, et cetera, et cetera. Who gets promoted? You don't get promoted for all the work you did preventing crime. You tend to get rewarded and recognized and promoted for the others. So it's a system. Can this be done? I think so. Norm, you talked early in your comments about, the notion of punctuated equilibrium. So, we had a pretty stable environment and 9/11 hits, and a lot of things were able to happen immediately after this. My concern with with our current situation, I'm glad Kent drew the Public Order Emergencies Commission report in with this one, because I think the two are very complementary to one another in many respects. It's the time that's now passed that presents that challenge. So conversations like this become increasingly important in keeping these going. But after 71 reviews, as the MCC report put it, over 2,000 recommendations, many of which have never been attended to by the RCMP or the federal government, it raises questions to me about the profession of policing. So a profession, of course, is characterized by higher education and ongoing learning, having its own body of knowledge, and a self-organizing membership. So think of credentials, and some of this has been talked about earlier as well. And if policing as a profession can't take stock of these two reports, organize to respond to it, and I'm going to close here, Norm, with just one comment on where it's been done before, we're losing a huge opportunity, because my sense is the intellectual capacity, the willingness is there. It's that we need a catalyst to build around to do this. Now, where's this been done before? In New South Wales and Australia, 25 or 26 years ago now, the Commissioner of Police there in the organization was under incredible scrutiny. I think it was the Woods Commissioner, if I'm not mistaken. And it was about police conduct, police ethics, and with an undercurrent of corruption and just not keeping pace with the times. So with a government report soon to be issued, the Commissioner of the New South Wales Police and the President of Charles Sturt University, and Vern, you're on the call here, you can probably speak to this more as well. They came together before that report was released and said, what are we going to do about this? Because training's got to be done differently. And the partnership between Charles Sturt University and New South Wales Police is now 25 or 26 years like this. To the cadets that are going through the program, they can't distinguish who's who, whether it's Charles Sturt academic or police, but the police deal with the tactical type training. The university takes care of everything else, and they provide oversight and direction to the overall. So it's 25 years it's been in the making, and the benefits of having that sort of relationship between the institution of policing and the university has derived tremendous benefits. For example, we think of, as a New South Wales Police, similarly 5.5 months of training, all in situ. And the university went out and talked to women and talked to Aboriginal Australians and said, what's preventing you from wanting to come into policing? I can't be away from my family or my community for 5.5 months. So they redid the first, I think, third of the training program. You can do it by distance or otherwise. Anyways, long story short, Norm, but I think both of these reports bring a lot of benefit. There are certainly those within police culture when it comes to the education component that are, as Eli pointed out, are saying you don't need a degree. Maybe it's not that, yeah, absolutely need a 3-year degree, but let's build and move towards that as a starting point.
I can't help but think, I think we've got the things surrounded, and I do want to move us towards the future and action. But I can't help but think that the common denominator here is an intractability within the sector to have the breakthroughs like you just described, to actually see them happen. And I think this is something that the victims in Nova Scotia would be most offended by if they read another report 8 years from now on another tragedy that repeated the observations that they have seen and made. I got to also point out it's interesting, and forgive me, Cal, but when you talk about all of the more qualitative aspects of policing, what you refer to the softer stuff as being where we're weak because we have a culture that really strengthens all of those more traditional militaristic enforcement things. But isn't it rather striking that many of the failures identified in the MCC were on those garden variety nuts and bolts access to policing? Sandra, would you agree that what you see in the report, what you heard in the testimony, the failings aren't necessarily on some abstract level of what we should be doing? They were fundamental failings in our ability to deliver nuts and bolts service, right?
Yeah, and perhaps the best example of that is in the lack of information sharing or mishandling of information, that from one person to another, things were not passed along correctly, or if they were passed along at all. I continue to be astounded by the fact that there were victims inside of Portapique that survived that weren't even known about by the Critical Incident Command and weren't interviewed until hours after their encounter. And they had critical information that didn't get communicated because of the confusion of the evening. And so I think that's probably one of the best examples of that. This is, from the perspective of a general public, which I think is really more of where I come from. It's shocking to think that during a critical incident like this, the policing agency that's responding can't properly receive and process and disseminate information of a very basic nature.
So the common denominator is perhaps the general skill sets and professionalism as applied to any aspect of policing. I know many of the people on the call here I recognize as having been very familiar with the whole police interoperability work that's gone on for 20 years. And when I read the MCC report, I felt like I was back in 2003. They say we don't know how to make radios connect. We don't know how to hear for each other. We don't know how to communicate with the public. So I think, it's important to recognize that these standards that we're seeing a lot of comments about on here, it's not just a training standard. It's not just a choice between depot or some other environment. It's a fundamental rethink of how policing listens and learns to what's expected and required, and has the kind of transformation that Cal described in New South Wales or that we've seen in other environments. Cal, I see you want to respond. Go ahead quickly.
Just really quickly, because I know others want to get on. Like if I was to ask the 5 whys on any of these questions, it comes back to me, to governance. And if we don't get the governance and accountability framework right within this ecosystem, as between police, police boards and elected and senior officials, it's going to be very difficult to bring about the changes. There's an overinflated notion of police operational independence. We saw that both outlined in the POEC report and the MCC reports. And I think as Kent mentioned earlier, it sometimes plays to each constituent's playbook to use that. It serves interests at different times, but it's one that we've got to get right. We need to have elected officials, senior officials and boards asking tough questions. And when I look at some of those, and the men and women on the ground, I'm sure did everything they could within the training and the tools and the equipment, et cetera, that they were provided. But as clearly pointed out, and as Sandra's mentioned earlier, it fell significantly short of anyone's expectations.
So let me take us then in a direction of governance, but with this proviso, I'd like us to talk about capital G and small g, because governance can take different forms. And I think the spirit behind this webinar is that there are maybe ways that we can create some kind of guiding or governing direction that aren't necessarily anchored in the capital G. Someone who knows a lot about this, Senator White, any thoughts? You've seen governance from both sides. Any thoughts you might want to offer here?
Yeah, thanks. Look, great discussion. I want to start with, I think we're getting bogged down in the minutia right now and trying to figure out the how rather than the what. I think the what part, for what I'm reading online, and I'm going through the chat message, and I really appreciate the comments, the importance of a national standard. And we've been asking, I know that governments have been asked for national standards on policing for both the officer level and for the service level. for at least 2 decades, and minister after minister refuses to even broach that discussion, predominantly saying it's the responsibility of the provinces. And I accept the fact that there is a responsibility on the province, but we're a country first and foremost. And I think that's where it should be sitting, is in the Minister of Public Safety, in setting out those national standards. And I think whether that happens to be, and I do support a degree program, whether that is to begin with a degree program, because my concern around a start with a degree program is that you may lose diversity. I know I served 19 years in the Arctic, and in Nunavut, it was very difficult to recruit regardless. If we had obligated local applicants to do a 3-year degree, we would have been very difficult to hire anybody. But even if you got to a point where instead of a 3-year degree, like Finland does, I've lectured at the Poliisikoulu in Tampere, Finland. Their model is 1 year of education, and then you go to work, and you come back 3 months later for 3 months, and you go back to work. So you're going to a location, you're learning the local culture and regional differences. You might be in Lapland, you might be in Helsinki as an example, but you're continuing until you finish your degree. And when you complete your degree, you actually get a pay raise. And if you continue your education, you get pay raises that are connected to your increased education. They also have a spectacular master's program they run that is required to move up in ranks, for example. So I think there are models out there in New South Wales. To be fair, I'm an adjunct professor at Charles Sturt University, and I teach in their program, organized crime. I've been doing that for over a decade now, and I did my doctorate there. So a little bit biased, but their system of education with New South Wales police officers, where you have trainers and academics working hand in glove to provide an academic training center, I think is a good model. And I think easily we get bogged down there's too many, it's too big, it's too difficult. And I think we should instead set out what we expect and then have the government deliver on this is what we expect. Instead of, because I'll tell you, for 2 decades, we've been saying it's too difficult. And guess what we've done? We haven't done a damn thing, to be honest. Pardon my language, I'm from Cape Breton, so I get away with that every now and then. Thanks.
Well, thanks for those contributions. And I mean, I think let's move towards action. What might make it work? Anyone from the audience want to jump in and offer a comment on how we move from a discussion to action? And of course, I'll include our 3 panel members. Based on what you're hearing, what you're seeing in the panel, can we go there? Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got some new fancy headphones here. So am I coming across okay?
You're fine. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Here's what I've seen that works well and what doesn't is when we have a group of people together where everybody is allowed to say, oh, but that doesn't work. Oh, but this can't be done. Oh, it's too expensive. You never get past the first morning in that discussion. And I think this is what Senator White was alluding to as well, and other people. We need a forum with the stakeholders. We can decide who those are later, but one where we don't accept somebody saying, nay, nay, nay. Let's get the wish list together, then figure out what can be done and can't be done. And I've seen that actually work very well. Well, for about an hour in an RCMP setting until it got shut down by all the naysayers, unfortunately. I'm hoping that's where we get to, because otherwise you're just going to hear, and this isn't a negative comment on Cal when he was saying the governance issue and such, but people shut down the conversation before we see the fruit. And that's my only comment. I'd love to see that happen.
Well, let's maybe talk about that. Becky, go ahead.
Thank you, folks. So I'm the Board of Police Commission Chair here in Halifax. Clearly, that's within Nova Scotia. There's a lot converging at the same time here for us at our municipal level. Of course, we have Halifax Regional Police as a business unit, and we have the RCMP as a model of integrated service. We've just received literally on Friday, and we'll be debating in the Committee of the Whole tomorrow, a policing transformation study recommendation report. I thought I would raise this now for those of you who have such a vested interest in this to get your hands on that report. There's a lot of change that is really well defined and correlating well within the MCC, this report, the defund report. There's our public safety office that we've just created here at Halifax Municipality. So there's a lot happening. And it seems to me this would be an opportunity to get some version of change here within our city, and with some support from you folks to get this at least better, if not closer to right. And whatever right works is what it would look like for how long, we don't know. That, you know, and when policing was developed at one point, this was effective. It's our world has changed. Our challenges are different. Our public expectations are different. So I'm throwing that out there as many of the folks, and certainly Sandra's here and Senator is here. I really hope that you'll stay engaged with us as we move this kind of consideration forward. I know that our board has made some changes already in relation to some of the reports that had come in prior to this most recent policing transformation study that was just released. This particular report that has come out is really well detailed on a path forward. Very, very, if you haven't read it, please, it's 425 pages. It's a long one, of course, a little shorter than the MCC one, but there are so many things that I think really is setting out a really good journey. And I agree with many of the points that people have raised in that national standards. You know, that's been identified. I don't know on a local level. I should say I do know on a local level, our RCMP leadership is very open to, and I'm not speaking for them, but this is the impression that I've got, that they're very open to change. And I think that timing is everything. We have the right players and the right leadership at the right time. And unfortunately, it wasn't effective for those lost souls that we have had. But we have an opportunity here in Nova Scotia to lead. And so I'm pleased to be part of it. And I invite each and every one of you, anyone has something to offer, please reach out to me. You know, as the chair, I see this as critically important, and hopefully something that Canada is watching so we can learn from it, and contribute across Canada, those folks who have something to offer here in what we do. Please be involved. You know, we need all of you to help us get this right or closer to right. Thanks for listening.
It goes right back to what Sandra said at the outset, with more hands to carry the torch. And I can't help but hear in your comments that you're widening the tent. You're basically saying, and I'm wondering, is this why, back to the senator's comments, for 20 years we've talked about this and not moved forward? Have we made the mistake of relying too heavily on the existing structural components, each and every one of whom has barriers, like Bruce described, that can shut action down in a 1 hour meeting? What you're doing is widening the tent. And if you can create that momentum and get other voices involved, sometimes things will take a life forward. And I think this is some of what we're talking about. Wayne, I'm going to go to you, and then I've got a couple others waiting as well.
Okay, a number of your speakers have talked about the importance of police governance. I've been involved in police governance for about 10 years. I'm on the board of the Canadian Association of Police Governance. I'm a past executive member and president of the provincial association. I'm currently the chair of Truro. But we talked about the initial training for police officers, but there's also a training component that's required for board members, and it's very inconsistent across the country. Currently, Nova Scotia has nothing in place. Supposedly, they're working on something. You go to BC, and they have a course that probably costs about $15,000. So we have nothing, $15,000, and everything in between. So I know CAPG is trying to position themselves as a center of excellence and trying to bring some consistency and standardization to the training across the country. But it's very hard to do because, as you know, the police acts are all provincial, and we're having a tough time getting money because the feds don't want to give money for something that's a provincial initiative. But I did want to underscore the very, very, very importance of proper training around police governance.
Yeah, I know Ontario has been putting an effort into making mandatory board training, and it hasn't been an easy ride, but it's there. Kent, you want to comment? Let's go back to you, and then I'll move back to the audience.
I mean, just to sympathize with Mr. Talbot, I mean, Ontario's doing something, but of course the board asked for training during the middle of a crisis. And, Ontario's initial reaction was no. So yes, I mean, the support at the board level and the training of board members is, I think, absolutely critical. I just want to throw in, though, that, the federal spending power, if there was the political will to use it. I mean, I'm just looking at the UK College of Policing, and they have a 33 million pound annual grant. And I know they don't, have federalism to deal with. But if you look at that website, it offers something really for everything. It offers something on police leadership, which is part of the story. It offers something on policing standards and ethics. It offers things for their version of boards, the elected crime commissioners, which are now moving towards a more community safety model, including the fire and paramedics. And so, whether it's done through government or with some government funding, I think if we had that kind of central resource, so we could learn what's being done in Halifax, learn what's being done in other parts of the country, that would be a big step forward. So, I mean, unfortunately, I think the timing with the federal government is they've spent a lot of what they see as their money. And so I think, one thing as citizens that we should be looking at is, given that MCC was a federal inquiry, will the federal government spend enough to implement some of its recommendations and its larger vision?
Well, it's interesting, Ken, and I want to go to a couple other folks here, but I recently had conversations with the UK College of Policing, and they wanted to collaborate with us here in Canada. And Lisa and I have been working with ANSPA, the Australia New Zealand Police Advisory Agency. And in each case, what's interesting is when they say, well, let's talk to a parallel in Canada, there's nowhere to plug in. There's no plug-in point. And I love the way you describe the scope of impact that the College of Policing or ANSPA or others are having. The Finnish, the Norwegians, they're not just saying this is a training standard body. They're saying this is the entire scope of the mission and how do we make it work. And so I think we're locked in a structure that has shown up in our discussion here as not having the pathways to get there where others have found the way to do that. Lisa, I know you wanted to comment, and I'm going to go to Ade, and then I'm going to start moving us forward to some closure. I know time-wise, folks, we're at 90 minutes, and some of you may need to drop off, but we are going to keep going for a little while. And I'd invite people to keep the discussion going on it. Ultimately, I obviously want to get back to our three panelists for some closing remarks. Lisa, go ahead. What did you want to offer? You muted.
Sure. It sort of goes back to the question from before, but first I'll just say I absolutely agree with everything that was just sort of said there. And in terms of that national body, you and I have talked a lot about that, of something that ANSA, for Canada, something that can be a knowledge leading body They do a lot of work in foresight. That's one of the areas I work in, and I think that would be very beneficial for a lot of reasons. It sort of ties into what I was going to say about the question of how do we move towards action. And I absolutely agree that governance is going to be key, because it needs to be that. But I do always worry the government, if we wait for government to take this up and take the lead, we could be waiting for quite some time before we actually develop those standards. And in my experience in developing innovations and working towards new things, sometimes we have to work on multiple fronts in tandem. And so maybe, there's a national organization that forms or something like that can start working on the national standards while also lobbying for government to start taking that up and working parallel tracks in order to move that forward. Because if we wait for government, we might be waiting a very long time.
Excellent. It's a phrase I often use is leading or following from the front. Get out there and do it, and let the structures fall in. Ade, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Norm. I just wanted to, it's more a question for, I guess, Norm and the panelists. I've heard quite a bit of best practices, and a lot of what I heard today is centered around training and training standards. So in terms of whether, some of the panelists think, would it be an idea to sort of move the ball forward, to sort of identify some of these best practices and then rank policing legislation by various governments, various provinces, and as well policing organizations, so that we can actually see who is implementing what best practices and who's not. There's good things happening in the UK that's not happening in the US, and vice versa with Australia and Canada. So there is a lot of best practices out there. And I'm not saying that, we want to sort of, the intent is not to shame the provinces or to shame the boards. But if there was a list of 50 best practices and we're able to say, well, these provinces have done X, Y, Z, and then we can see those who have not, and which police boards have done this and which police boards, then at least that brings us in a public forum that an independent body has assessed not just the policing legislation, but also the policing organizations themselves, and looked at what best practices have they implemented or not. So would that be an idea?
I think it's a great suggestion, Adi, and I think there's precedent for it. If we think back even to the total quality movement back in the 1990s, there came a point where once people could define what it looked like, it almost created a momentum where people needed to conform. They needed to move in the direction of those higher standards. You just wouldn't be doing business at that time if you were not moving in the direction of either ISO type standards or some type of total quality movement. And what I'm hearing you saying, if we can at least get a body that can begin to articulate what excellence looks like, then there might be a voluntary uptake and compliance as people move towards it. And I think that's a way to get there without necessarily waiting for somebody to lay out a recipe or enact legislation that drives it forward. Start saying what excellence looks like. Start finding ways for people to compare themselves to that standard of excellence, and not by shaming, but letting them aspire to moving forward. And I think those are all excellent suggestions. I want to cycle back. I want to go to Sandra for a moment, and I want to ask, what are you hearing here? Is it encouraging? Are you seeing hands carrying the torch? Is there something you would offer to the room at this point to say, as we move towards bringing the rubber to the road? What are your thoughts?
I do think it's been a helpful discussion. Certainly, I appreciate hearing that there are some more middle of the road ideas about how we can start taking steps forward. So much of the time, and this situation is no exception, that we think, okay, well, it's just so hard to make changes, so we don't make any at all. But there are incremental things that can be done. I'm sure there's a few bits and pieces that have been done already, and some that we can probably tackle relatively easily. I like the point that Ade made a moment ago, just identifying that and this is something I took away from what he said, was that there probably are appropriate standards and practices out there already that just aren't being honored and fulfilled properly. So we're not necessarily reinventing all of the wheels, right? We need to start revisiting, and I guess this all ties back into training, which is probably one of the first words we spoke today, that we can really cycle back to making sure we're doing some of the things that we already know we ought to be doing, and making sure that we're doing them properly, in addition to some of the things we have to change. Not everything is monumental change, I guess, is something that I'm pleased to hear is part of the discord, or the discussion, excuse me.
Fabulous. And certainly anybody listening to this, it sounds like we know a path forward. The challenge is we haven't been able to find the traction or the way to move down that path. And as many people have said today, this marks an opportunity. There's a catalyst, there's a momentum, there's a need, and maybe we can move it forward. Eli, your thoughts, and then I'll go to Kent, and then I'm going to throw back to our hosts.
Very quickly, some very good comments are made, and I like what Adi said. There are good practices out there. Collect them all, do a literature review, and I know one's being done. So we have at least a measurement of this is what's required. But somebody has to own this, right? Somebody has to own this set of national standards that we think are the gold standard of policing. I also like what Cal said. This is a debate that goes on in organizational behavior all the time. Can you change your culture by changing the systems? And it's the same with human behavior. We have our attitudes and we have our behaviors. And sometimes an attitude could be changed by having those behaviors change through various incentives and disincentives. And I think there's something about that. I think if we bring in systems and models and best practices, the culture will come as well. It'll come along with that, because I think underlying everything we're talking about, there is an appetite for the change in culture. We see it from our own members and everyone else, and from the public. So there's an appetite for it. Bring in the systems, bring in the structures, bring in the best practices, something we could measure it against, build the ball field, and they will come.
Excellent. Well, Kent, your thoughts on that? And then there's a real natural path kind of opening up here in front of us. Go ahead. Mute.
I'm very gratified by the discussion, and the chair of the Halifax board. I'm interested in working with you and others going forward. I also think that building on these best practices is also important, because both the MCC and Public Order Commission have criticized the police, and rightly so. The failures are cannot be contested. But at the end of the day, they're also both reminders that we need the police, and we need good people to come into the police. And so maybe over the next year, a little bit of rewarding and publicizing those police services and police leaders who are actually doing something for the better may be in order. Not at all to say that criticism and accountability is obviously very important, and we wouldn't be here without that exercise. But we also need to recognize that we need police. We need police to change, but we need police to be there for us when we are in our greatest need. So, thank you.
Devon, go ahead before I move to close.
Thanks very much. I just want to leave us with this thought. I've been fortunate to be in this field of work now for 35 plus years, and I can say there was a period of time when I would say, yes, police were so incredibly resistant to change. It was incredibly frustrating for me. In 2020, I moved to Ontario to take on the role of Inspector General of Policing. Met with every single police leader, their command staff, every single board across the province. I can tell you everything we're talking about here is what I put on the table. There was zero resistance. I'm doing work for the province of Manitoba right now in terms of creating the future of what police education and training looks like. There is zero resistance. I'm fortunate to be doing a lot of work in the United States of all places. And I can tell you, as we meet with police leaders in the community there is no resistance to change. What they're looking for is this: somebody to help them navigate the way forward, because a lot of them simply don't know. So we have a real opportunity right here. We know what didn't work in the past. We know what we desire for the future, and what police leaders are looking for, and boards is help moving forward. So let's take this opportunity and really help advance this cause for every single one of us.
Thanks for that, Devon, and your experiences in the inspectorate is really helpful to bring light to that. Chair Kent described one big tent. You want to comment again just before I move on, Becky?
No. I was just giving Devon a thumbs up.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was talking to Chair Kent, Becky Kent from Halifax. Sorry, different Kent.
Yeah, thank you very much. What I wanted to say is that I don't have everyone's contact. So if there's anyone has heard me say that I would like to have the opportunity to have a further conversation with you, can you just send me something? I'm easy to find. Send me a note. Sandra, you're already on my list. Yeah, I want to make sure we have that connectivity, and I think it'd be easier for each of you to send to me if you can. Thank you so much for being part of what is so incredibly important to Nova Scotians and those of us here who have a chance to make some changes very quickly.
Well, thanks, Becky. And where I was about to go is, you've described one tent that's opened up in the Maritimes that is going to create opportunity for these discussions. And I think it's a nice segue back to John as Vice President of the coalition here. It's the coalition that's hosted us today. They obviously saw not only an opportunity, but a very important need to create these type of forums. And it's possible that what we have is a coalition of tents across the country that are going to move in this direction and ultimately create the momentum that we're looking for. I want to just offer my thanks to Sandra and Kent and Eli for their tremendous leadership in this discussion, and to all of you who have contributed along the way. I'm going to turn it now to John Lilly. John, your thoughts on what you've heard and what you see as a possible path forward.
Thank you very much, Norm. Thanks for some amazing moderation, bringing the questions to the fore and the possible solutions. Thank you to the panelists. What have I learned today? First and foremost, I've learned that there is a desire for change generally from the audience that was here this morning. And our audience, quite frankly, was a good proportion were police or former police. And that's inspiring for me. The other segment of our audience today are non-police, police governance, like Becky, and some of the families of the victims in Nova Scotia. First, let me say, I really feel for the victims, the families. You lost, and you will never regain what you lost. I feel for you, and I feel an obligation that all of us together have to make a difference for you. If the government won't activate, if the provinces won't activate, we together can activate. I think that's the biggest single learning, to be honest, that we can do this together. I feel inspired. I believe that there is a process, maybe a straw man that might work for us, and that would be to, as I can't remember, it was a senator who listed this, or Cal, but I think the suggestion was that if we can have a full understanding of what needs to happen, and then determine steps forward outside of government influence to help move that forward, whether advocacy or research, we can build momentum. I also see a need to continue with webinars. This is our most successful webinar to date. Webinars create energy, and they're accessible. You don't have to get in a plane and fly to a conference, for instance. So let me in close say a little bit about the Coalition for Canadian Police Reform. We're 2.5 years old. We're a registered charity. We were formed in the aftermath of the George Floyd event. And we have been working hard. Those of us at the nidus of this, the board is 12 people strong. It's a diverse board. The people at the NIDUS include myself and Dave Castles and the treasurer, Jabril Ibrahim, and various members of the board. I would mention in particular Nancy McNaughton, who's a professor of adult education in healthcare. And also I would mention Rose LeMay, who's an Indigenous woman from Ottawa. And I would mention as well Dr. Ken Harris. There's others as well, of course. Sorry, I haven't mentioned everybody. We're working hard, but we need help. We need members. We need donations. We need grants. We can't do it on a shoestring anymore. We've commissioned, for instance, a piece of research from Tam Poselin in Royal Roads in Victoria, and that was by the courtesy of donors last fall for the Giving Tuesday. And so I'd like to thank everybody participating. If you review the poll results, there seems to be a desire by 11 people to help action next steps. And there are 8 votes that say, yeah, let's go for another webinar. And I'm pleased to see that there's a couple of votes. Email me. I might consider making a donation or joining as a member. Back to you, Norm, and then it'll be good night all. The tape will be available. Oh, give me a week, please. I always promise and under-deliver, so.
Dave, is there anything you want to add as we close?
Well, the most important thing for everyone, all the participants, is we must not lose momentum. We put this webinar on because we know how important it is, not only for the families and the Mass Casualty Commission and all of their efforts and their recommendations, and our coalition. We're all on the same page here. We don't want to lose momentum. I welcome a path forward. Norm, you briefly talked about a path forward, and while it's not defined here, there is a path forward. And I would hope that you all remain with us. I think that we will have I know we'll have a second webinar, but we need the coalition needs to continue to focus. As Eli said to one day, politically, we need to sharpen the stick. We get political attention when we sharpen the stick. So if there's any way you can help us in any way, and I still believe truly the federal government, the Public Safety Minister's office has a very important role to play in Canada, not only with the RCMP, but with policing across Canada. And I would hope that they would take a leadership role. We need to find a way to sharpen the stick and move that forward. And I can only say to the panelists and to Norm and to John, who's been working hard with me for the last 2.5 years, is we have to move this forward, and we want your help in any way that you can give it to us. So I thank you all for being with us today. Thank you.
Well, folks, I'm just going to leave you